experience much of I experienced living without electricity or running water, and had many questions as a young person to understand what are the reasons for these environmental injustices that were happening in my own community. I'm gonna have to stop and restart because my screen is not going. Yes.
No problem, take your time.
On the Navajo Nation, there are approximately 30% of the people who do not have access to running water or electricity. And for my work as an extension specialist, I'm able to bring back full circle my own upbringing, as well as my engineering and scientific backgrounds into the work I do to address the unique environmental challenges that are facing tribal communities. Early on in 2020, as COVID-19 spread across the world, it amplified food, energy, and water insecurities across the world, and disproportionately impacting Indigenous peoples. In the United States, COVID-19 was rampant on the Navajo Nation, the largest tribe in the United States, where poverty rates are more than twice the state of Arizona. Navajo tribal leaders cited lack of healthy foods and running water as reasons for prolific transmission of COVID-19. And in May 2020, it resulted in one of the highest rates of COVID-19, third only to the state of New Jersey and New York. In addition, in the United States, Native Americans also have the highest rate of diabetes and cancer, and these comorbidities are prevalent on the Navajo Nation. In addition, on the Navajo Nation, there are over 500 abandoned uranium mines, making Navajos at risk for environmental exposure to abandoned mines. On the Navajo Nation, arsenic and uranium are prevalent in unregulated water sources, which are often used for drinking water. Research has linked arsenic and diabetes. Food, energy, water insecurities were amplified on the Navajo Nation during the COVID-19 pandemic. The Navajo Nation is a rural food desert with only 13 grocery stores across the 27,000 square miles of remote terrain, for a population of nearly 200,000 tribal citizens. This is about 8 people per square mile. Furthermore, 30% of the people do not have access to running water, 40% lack electricity, and the Navajo people haul water as far as 5 to 50 miles to get water, incurring a large cost for water in comparison to nearby cities. So my program in DigiFuse early on was wanting to find ways to assist. And one small way that we were able to assist immediately was to contribute to the relief efforts that were occurring early on by donating 900 pounds of produce from our greenhouse to the Navajo people. So my program is an NSF NRT, which is the training program, and we call it INDIGEFUSE for short. And in the INDIGEFUSE, what we're focused on is developing technical solutions to these types of food, energy, water challenges, but with an understanding of the communities in which we work, and in our case is our indigenous communities, to understand the governance and the culture and the society to do our work. INDIGEFUSE has a vision to develop a diverse workforce with intercultural awareness, with expertise in food, energy, and water systems. Our primary partner is the Net College, and the Net College is the oldest tribal college in the United States. INDIGEFUSE is centered around the research theme of the development of off-grid production of off-grid systems to produce drinking water, to manage brine, and to be connected to control environmental agricultural systems. So our research that our trainees doing include research in the photovoltaics, holographic sensors, unit operations and technologies, material science, device and system resilience, with the context of other aspects of place-based training, K through 12 curriculum development, and social aspects to the science that we do. So in partnership with the Net College, we have developed the first prototype of the system, which is shown here is the water system. And it sits on a trailer bed with the thought that the unit could be transported to the water source, which is often non-potable, and then take it back to the wherever the water is needed. And that could be at the home or at a sheep camp, or at a certain cultural gathering where water is needed. The system involves pre-filters and solar nanofiltration membranes, an electrical control system to operate the system, all which are powered by solar. The finished water is stored on the other side of this water tank. And this system can be hooked up to truck and driven to different locations, and can support about 5 families. So during the pandemic, the Navajo Nation Council reached out to us to learn more about the water systems that we were developing, and to also find if there are ways that we can be able to pilot this in the homes to try to address the water insecurities. So the Indian Health Service received CARE funds to support the development of water resources during the pandemic, and to produce more points of water access to the people. And in this mission, a group was created to consist of not only Navajo Nation entities, but also state, university, non-private, and federal entities to work together to support this mission. And that means sharing data, sharing information about our work. Many of these various partners were already working on the Navajo Nation, and we're already doing some sort of relief related to water. Being in this group really streamlined what we were doing, and really pushed us fast forward to obtain data, to collaborate within a really short period of time. So this is the website where it shows a map of all the potable water on the Navajo Nation, including those that were just developed during the COVID-19 pandemic, so that the water user could go on this website, and instead of going to non-potable sources, they could find where there is drinking water that is safe for consumption. So in our work, in terms of the request to pilot the units, we had to get research approval from the Navajo Nation. And because we also want to consider the people and as a center of our piloting, our research involved human subjects research. And that meant getting approval from the Navajo Nation Human Research Review Board. Here's the website, and listed are the steps, which are pretty detailed. It can take anywhere from 6 to 2 years to get approval, depending on the type of project that you're working on. And the first big part of it is community partnership and tribal program partnership. 1 and 2 takes the most time. And so it's really important that either those partnerships are already developed, or you take time to make sure you have the time to develop those partnerships. And that's one thing that the board really looks for, and they discourage researchers coming in without having developed 1 and 2. So in our work, we had the challenge of trying to get approvals during the pandemic. Much of the Navajo Nation is very remote, and many areas do not have broadband connection or even cellular connection. So many of the chapters, which were already operating on a limited scale, were also not easily connected to the grid. So for the chapter meetings that were being held, they were all held remotely over telephone. And so it was very difficult to do this during the pandemic. I know for many of us that are connected, this would be quite easy, but it was not true of the Navajo Nation. And so there were some instances of us not being able to have good connection audio wise with the people, trying to find the individual or connect with the chapter to even get on the agenda. And even just the not being able to show visually what we're doing, and having to explain it all over the phone. But we were able to get chapter resolutions from 3 primary chapters that we partnered with Dig Deep, because they were already doing some work in these communities. And this is what a tribal government chapter resolution looks like. It has the letterhead, the title, and all the bullet points of what you aim to do and what you like to do. So each of the chapter houses are analogous to states. So over the course of a year, and many thanks to my graduate student, Nikki Tooley, who really led a lot of this effort in terms of like organizing, connecting, getting in contact with people, which takes a lot of hours to do, just to even get on the agenda. Once you're on the agenda, you pretty much have basically made it into most of the time commitment. So we end up getting about 12 chapter resolutions, including agency councils within the Navajo Nation. We also partnered with various universities that were already working on the Navajo Nation on different areas related to water quality and water mapping. One of the things we did first was to understand look at what are the factors that should be considered in understanding an individual Navajo's risk to contracting COVID-19. Is it really household drinking water, or is it other factors like lack of access to food or comorbidities, or even other social factors like multi-generational homes? So we looked at all of these using publicly available data, and mainly to also prioritize the water infrastructure that was being built within such a short period of time. And so this map is a map of the Navajo Nation for all the chapters, and it's color coded according to the percentage of home lacking pipe water. And this is using the Indian Health Service deficiency levels. So you can see that on the southern portion of the Navajo Nation, as well as a north central area of the Navajo Nation, has chapters that have greater than 27% of homes without running water, a few on the west and a few on the east. And we found later that this data is definitely subject to error, because some of the data is outdated, or some of the chapters may not have very much data. So even though you see some chapters that have 0.8%, that may not really reflect true data within the chapter houses. But this is what the federal government has obtained currently for understanding water insecurities on the Navajo Nation. We also looked at distance to grocery stores, and this is a map showing total of 63 stores, 13 on the Navajo Nation and 50 off the Navajo Nation. So what Navajos do is, because they live very remotely, they often go to the bigger cities to get water, to get food, and do food runs every 1 or 2 weeks. But they also have local grocery stores like Bash's, and those stores tend to be much more expensive in terms of the cost to buy food. So this map shows the distance that one would have to travel to get to a store. And so depending on their origin, say somebody is living here, they're basically driving about 30 to 60 kilometers to get to the nearest grocery store. And similarly, so wherever you see green and yellow, those are the areas of places on the Navajo Nation where an individual has to actually drive really far to get to grocery store. We also looked at distance to watering points, and this map shows the distance that one would have to take to get to the nearest potable water. And you can see those in the light blue are traveling 20 to 30 kilometers to get to a certain watering point. And these are all calculated based on the roads that exist. So based on many factors that we looked at, I didn't show you all the variables that we looked at, but based on our preliminary analysis and using the COVID-19 public data from the Navajo Nation, which is basically 8 Indian Health Service clinics that have data for that unit. And based on those 8 data and all the chapter level information we're able to obtain, we found that one of the biggest correlations with only those 8 data points is to language. So what you see on this graph is that the Navajo Nation, on the Navajo Nation, the areas where there are prominent Navajo only speakers tended to have higher rates of COVID-19 infection rates. And those that predominantly spoke English or were able to speak English had lower levels of infection rates. And so that's where we really knew that public health messaging is key for this tribal community. And I'm now collaborating with Dr. Stephanie Carroll, who does a lot of work on data sovereignty and health research to look at public health messaging and why and how that could be improved. So going back to the piloting of the water insecurities, piloting of the off-grid water systems to address water insecurities, we were able to get a 1-year grant from internal University of Arizona funding to pilot systems within 4 communities. These 4 communities were selected by our community partner, Six World Solutions, which is a Navajo-based community grassroots organizations working on food, energy, water security. And they had already been working with various families and communities to get relief during the COVID-19 pandemic, including installing wells and installing rainwater harvest catchments. And so these are the 4 communities that we focused on. And as you can see, 2 and 3 are definitely in the blue areas of areas on the Navajo Nation where there are higher numbers of homes lacking pipe water. And then 4 is about 8.1%, and then number 1 is 0.7%. However, again, say that even as going into the field, we also did see that this 0.7% actually is not reflective, because there's actually a lot more people in this area, number 1, where they do not have running water. Another thing that we looked at within our work was water quality, because our system are designed to treat certain water quality requirements. And so we want to know, what is the source water? What is the quality of that water? And are our systems adequately treating that water to drinking water standards? So with the help of Joe Hoover, our collaborator at Montana State University Billings, he led a lot of this work to compile the water quality from many different sources, including state, federal, university, and other organizations through decades who have been collecting water quality data, putting it all on one portal for access for people and for the tribal water managers. So this was useful for us to look at where are the major challenges in terms of arsenic and uranium. So what you see here is that arsenic is elevated beyond the drinking water standards, primarily in the central area of the Navajo Nation, southern and western areas, with some sprinkling in the eastern. In terms of uranium, the primary areas of concern are central on the Navajo Nation, and again on the western area of the Navajo Nation, in addition to the southeast area. So with our project, what we're trying to do is that we have a lot of different prongs to the overall research goal, but our vision is to increase Indigenous resilience, water security and sovereignty through these off-grid solar-powered nanofiltration water systems that would be designed, built, and operated by the Navajo people. So in this short project, what we wanted to do was characterize the water quality of the source water and see if these units were capable of producing drinking water. One of the main goals also was Indigenous co-design, and that involved working closely with our Navajo partners. They have technicians that have been working on various areas of like well construction, solar construction, green gray water harvesting systems, and so forth. And so we brought them down to campus where they got training on basic water quality, basic solar, introduction to environmental engineering 101. And then we went into the co-design, which was basically to downscale our unit that I showed you earlier here to a household unit. And this involved a lot of brainstorming, placing parts where we think would be useful for the user. And so that started in about May of 2021. This is a photo of our INDIGEFUSE trainees and our partners. Our INDIGEFUSE trainees participate in developing that workshop and in that Indigenous co-design. So these are more photos of what we ended up designing. These are photos of the technicians working on the system and basically building the system. And more pictures. Basically, we found that our first prototype was too big for one family unit. One of our trainees developed the first prototype, number 2, that was for a family unit. And then with 6-row solution, we developed prototype 3, which looks like this. And then from many conversations, meetings, piloting, we ended up have four SNF systems built with 2 having UV capabilities. So solar nanofiltration is to treat water, non-potable water, to drinking water standards, and removing dissolved solids, lowering the TDS, such as calcium, magnesium, or other salts, and other contaminants like uranium or arsenic. And then the UV system is to ensure adequate disinfection into inactivating pathogen and microbes, which were important for some communities where that was really prevalent. So this is a solar UV system, and this system could be used when the source water doesn't have metals or salts that is high, but that only disinfection is really needed for that system. So one of the things that we wanted to do is also understand what the people thought about these systems and really stay away from helicopter research where there's a lot of history of engineers building systems and dropping it off in communities never to be used. Our idea was really to co-design, to have community-driven project where our main invitation came from the Navajo Nation Council to pilot these systems. And our directive is to really talk to the people, understand what they think about the systems, and engage them. However, community engagement was really challenging during the pandemic. As I was explaining earlier, just being able to connect with somebody at the chapter house was very hard and almost impossible. So in about October 2021, we started trying to go out in person to make that physical connection in a safe way, in an outdoor area where we could talk to the community, we could see the water sources, do water sampling, and also to try to recruit Navajos to attend focus groups so that we could ask them what are their perceptions of these off-grid technologies. So the community engagement was really effective once we did go out there. The communities were excited, they wanted to be involved. They showed us different water area sources that were of concern. However, when it came to getting people to attend the focus groups, it was challenging because of lack of access to just basically getting online. However, we were able to do one focus group over Zoom with about 4 people. And then the second one we actually did in person with about 6 people. We'll be continuing to doing those focus groups. It was really interesting to hear about the impact of COVID-19 on water access. And we'll be doing more focus groups into basically right now and into the next year. So in our community engagement, we also met other organizations that are working on food, energy, water insecurities, including this group called the Purpose Focused Alternative Learning. And they've been working on capacity building, access to clean water, food sovereignty. And so we made sure to connect with them and talk to them about our work as well. So now I want to talk about the specific communities where we piloted in these 4 communities. And the first one is Lupton, Arizona. And Lupton is located in the southeast area of the Navajo Nation. There's a interstate, I believe this is the interstate I-40 right here. And then our site is down south, and it's very treacherous to even get down here to this community. But I want to share what it means to have water insecurity on the Navajo Nation. For this family, the elder walks 1 to 2 miles to the well. Using a wheelbarrow, she carries she carries her gas and her water. And so 6 Rural Solutions installed a water cistern for rainwater harvesting. So at least the elder could have water on site for during to capture the rain. But on other times, they actually have to deal with the weather and freezing pipes and so forth. So we went there and we took water quality samples of their water cistern as one water source, and also of their well. So this is what the well looks like. The water comes out here and it goes into the cistern, which is basically livestock well, but the people use this to drink. And during the winters, the pipes freeze up, so they'll build a fire to unfreeze the pipes. And they have to provide gas for this pump to operate. They didn't have a solar panel, however, it was destroyed by water vandalism. So that's what the water cistern looks like, where they get their water. And number 2 is Black Falls. And here, Black Falls is really known for the chocolate falls. That's really a big attraction during the spring winter melt season. And in this area, the people have a history of uranium, elevated levels of uranium and arsenic in their water, which has really impacted the health of the people. Our third community is Oljeto, which is in Utah. And there, the people rely either on the water source from the chapter houses, which is potable, or springs, naturally occurring springs. So our family here, their closest potable water is about 25 miles on highway or 15 miles on dirt road. And that doesn't sound very far, but with the challenges of income or lack thereof, that is very hard to do on a regular basis. So we working with that family, and this is the spring that is closest to them, which is just a mile from them. And the community has used this spring water since the 1900s. It's located on the side of a cliff. It's very difficult to access. It took me a day to just even find the spring. And the water pipes freeze up during the winter. So during the winter, they'll build a fire up here and unthaw the pipes. And during the summer, there's been disputes for water access during drought times. But you actually have to climb up on top of this cliff to even get to the lever to turn it on. And that's basically how you get up to the top of the cliff, turn the lever on. And photo of me getting water quality samples. And just to reiterate how far they have to drive, they can go to the chapter house or they can go to a local store to get water. This is a trading post where they do have water available for people to haul. The final one is very different. It's in the San Juan community, and it's located near power plant. And this community is actually pretty well developed and connected to the grid next to Farmington, New Mexico. However, this particular family actually has to haul water because they have a different challenge in that their ancestral lands was not included in the boundary for the Navajo Nation. So the Navajo Nation boundary is literally probably like 500 feet away, and there is power and water to those communities, but they just happen to live just a few feet from the boundary, so they do not have access to running water. However, they live next to the San Juan River, and there's a spring that comes out right next to the home. So I just wanted to share those examples, even despite all the challenges that the Navajo people face when it comes to water insecurities, especially during a pandemic. The indigenous people have shown resilience through time. And what is indigenous resilience? That's a question I asked, and I still think about it. What really does that mean? And to me, I think about my own family. Here's a photo of my great-grandmother and her children. And I think about their ability to survive and maintain their livelihoods through the last century to make it possible for us to still be here and be able to have a home in our community. Also think about my great-grandmother who her resilience is demonstrated through her rug weaving and being able to survive the long walk when the United States government forced our people to concentration camps, and many people died and starved. But my grandmother wove rugs so that her family could survive, and for that reason, I'm here today. And that to me is resilience. I also think about my parents and how they survived the boarding school era. Both of my parents were taken away from their families at young ages and taken away to Oregon and Nevada and forced to not speak their language. However, my parents instilled in me the pride of my language and knowledge of my culture and people. To me, that is resilience demonstrated by my parents. And in the definition in the dictionary, we see resilience defined as the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties and toughness. And we have in our field, the resilience defined by C.S. Holling, which we're all very familiar with as ecological resilience. But I've been really interested in this idea of Indigenous resilience, and I did find this paper from Australia where they did a systematic review about what is Indigenous resilience. And I like their definition because it really resonates with me in terms of what I shared with you about my own family and their connection to land and being able to survive adversities, heal, think about the future that so that I could be here today. And I think about how I want to carry that on for 7 generations. So it's not just the ability to just survive, but to thrive in today's dominant culture. So this is another topic that I'm interested in. And so through my research, we'll be asking this question with the community that we're working in. What is Indigenous resilience? What are the indicators that need to be measured and defined? And I've set this context with a framework that me and my team developed for climate change impacts on tribal communities. But I did definitely incorporate the different levels of the community in terms of those different aspects of factors that need to be considered in thinking about different types of capacities to be resilient. So in conclusion, I just wanted to say that there are many different perturbations, and it's important to think about how a community can respond to different perturbations, whether it's climate change or the COVID-19 pandemic, and that there's a lot of uncertainties to these models, a lot of lack of data, different interactions are unpredictable. But it's important that these adaptations strategies be integrated into the broader plan for tribal communities. Many tribes have been left out through history. And so it's important that they be involved, that they are at the table, and that planning is participatory and transparent. And that's what we're trying to do with our project, is really hold to those values in understanding Indigenous resilience. Thank you very much, and I'll go ahead and take any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Karletta. That was amazing. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. It's usually tradition that the grad students or undergrads get to ask questions first. So we'll go ahead and give them the floor if any students have any questions. And then after a moment of silence, we go ahead and open the floor to anybody else who has any questions. And since we had that technical difficulty there, we can definitely go over the through 5 o'clock. That's totally fine. So go ahead and ask away. Yeah, go ahead, Crystal.
Hi, Karletta. Thank you so much for that really wonderful talk. And thank you for reminding us thank you for really demonstrating the importance of participatory research and showing what can be done when that happens. So I have a question about how you treat data sovereignty in your work. And I know you mentioned it at one point when we were talking about the communication with maybe the medical, public health communication. And I was just wondering, how in your project have you handled that? Has that been a concern for your partners, and are there ways that you're able to assure that they can have control over that data?
Yes, that's a great question. Thank you so much for asking that. That's actually central to what we're trying to do and really dictates our work. So our work is approved by the Navajo Nation Human Subjects Review Board, which has, the Navajo Nation has a research code. And in that research code, which is law, it dictates what the rules are about data, data management, data transfer, and who has access to that data, when it can be published. And the way that that is managed is through oversight by the Navajo Research Review Board. And so we have to ask them for permission for data collection, and also for dissemination of that data, which also includes presentation at conferences. And part of the dissemination includes that the community has to be informed of those results prior to being broadcasted to outside entities. And then in terms of the COVID-19 data, that's really even more detailed because that's health data. And we've been working on an MOU for about 1.5 years now with the Navajo Nation, to outline exactly how we can use that data, or how we can access the data, or what we can and cannot do. So it's a detailed agreement with the Navajo Nation, in which their Department of Justice are the ones that are working together with the University of Arizona to make sure we're acting appropriately in the data. So we haven't been able to get any chapter level COVID-19 data. And once we are able, we do get approval to get that data, then we'll be able to really look further into the different types of factors that may be important to understanding risk to infection to COVID-19.
Thanks. Yeah, so I guess I just wonder, just as a quick follow-up, whether you've had any pushback, because actually a collaborative project that I'm part of, we have had that from both the university and some funders because of requirements about making data public, and actually because the university usually by default protects the researcher, and actually we were told we actually cannot give up the right to having full control of the data. And I just wonder, is there an example maybe we can give from what you're doing at University of Arizona to kind of show that there's precedence that data sovereignty can and should be recognized and upheld?
Okay, yeah, so for our project, we got permission from the Navajo Nation, and once they gave us permission, then because they do have a research code, then that's where it falls under in terms of data ownership. So the data doesn't belong to us. So because they have a law for that, then that's where we're required to that data will be turned over to the Navajo Nation at the end of the project, and at any time they can request for data. At the University of Arizona, we also have the Arizona Board of Regents Tribal Consultation Guidelines, and we're supposed to, we are required to follow that prior to any kind of research engagement with tribal nations. And through that, the data sovereignty and the management of data, dissemination of data, all of that should be discussed prior to even getting the grant, or even getting your proposal in. So we have an office called the Native American Technical Office, and they oversee that you're having those consultations with the tribe. So I think maybe it is that our university is probably more aware of it through our institution and the way that it's set up. So that would be an example, I think, is the Navajo Research Code. And you can Google it, but you can also find it under the Navajo Human Research Review Board.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Great to see Dr. Del Bolton on the call. She's my collaborator and co-PI for a new grant that we received called the Native Fuse Alliance, that's funded by the National Science Foundation.
So Karletta, I wanted to ask you, can you tell us some about how Native students are inspired to go to graduate school, and particularly with your programs because of the projects? Do you think that doing work with Native communities is particularly important for recruiting and supporting Native grad students?
That's a great question. Yes, I definitely think that community-based research is really attracts Native American students. And at the University of Arizona, we actually have a fellowship that Native American students in STEM can obtain to pursue their degree, which is called the Indigenous Loan Program. And many of those students who come through that program really are seeking to do projects related to their communities. And there's that strong connection to community and the desire to do their research with their community. So even in all different areas, not just geosciences, there are students in health and economics and many more fields in which they really have a desire to do research in their communities. And since being faculty at the University of Arizona, and thankfully through my own position as an extension specialist, I'm able to provide opportunities for Native American students in environmental sciences to be able to do that work. So for example, I have students from Tuscarora Nation, from Hopi Tribe, from Tana Atam, from Navajo Nation, and majority of my students within my program, which over the years, 11 of the 13 have been Native American, mainly because of the projects that I focused on within my community-based research projects. So I think there is that attraction within our programs to attract Native American students.
Go ahead, Dario.
Hi, Karletta. Very nice talk. Thank you very much. I want to ask you a question of a very different nature, something that caught my attention in your last part of the talk, talking about resilience and your family that moved to Oregon. In connection to something in the recent news, some tribal members in Washington have been stripped away of their tribal privileges because of not belonging to those tribes. And I'm wondering whether the COVID the pandemic and other hardships that it brought up have exacerbated these conflicts among tribes, which would speak against resilience and banding together, generally speaking.
Yeah. I'm somewhat familiar with that in terms of just reading about that news story. And I think it's really complicated when you talk about tribal membership. And there's a lot of debates around that. A lot of complexities because the US government is the one that's defining who we are today as Native people based on blood quantum. But that ourselves, we don't define ourselves that way. I don't say I'm like, certain percentage Navajo, or we say where we're from, our community, our clans, and we have many people who are adopted into our community. And then we have many people who are born for other tribal nations. And so they're still considered part of our community. They're still considered Native American by our definition, but yet the US government is the one that is imposing these blood quantum requirements as if we're animals, which I think is very unjust. And for that reason, that turns into political challenges within the tribal government, where they have to use the US definition to basically provide services, which requires funding. The tribes get certain number of funding based on the number of tribal members they have. So it turns into this financial dilemma and conflict. And that's really an outside influence that is causing a lot of that trauma. And the trauma that many people have experienced through the years, from boarding school to sterilization, environmental injustices, all of that is just accumulated into that can turn into very complex matters when you talk about tribal membership. And so it's not very easy. And I think despite all those challenges, I still believe that the people are resilient to have persevered through many of those different atrocities that they have experienced. So I'm hopeful that that discussion will continue about the Native nations being able to define their own rules for tribal membership and not be restricted to like what was imposed on them like 200 or 300 years ago. Because, we've intermarried, we've had different journeys, and that needs to be considered in terms of how we define ourselves as Native Americans.
Thank you. Really appreciate your insight.
Thank you.
I think it's really interesting too, Karletta, how that kind of comes full circle as well as a form of resilience, sounds like. Well, we also know you're very busy and don't want to keep you any longer than you need to be here, but thank you again so much for speaking with us and taking the time to speak with us. Yeah, claps again, everyone's clapping. We hope to keep in touch with you and have a good rest of your week.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.